Graig Kreindler, welcome to the Bookshelf Conversation.
Thank you for having me, Ron, as always.
Now, it's a little different here because most of the people I chat with are authors, so I can show up their product and we talk about the research, and which we will do uh, as we go on. So I'll start with the basics. When did you get interested in baseball?
Well, I think the baseball bug was kind of planted very, very early on. I mean, my dad is a huge Yankees fan, and my mom is a big Brooklyn Dodgers fan. Somehow they managed to stay married for 50 years. Uh, but yeah, I it's kind of always been kind of ingrained in me. Apparently, I was going to games when I was just a little baby, even. Um, but I'd say that I kind of like really got into it maybe around 4 or 5 years old or so.
Well, that's even I mean young for. Uh, I mean, I didn't really come to the game till I was basically like 8 or 9, at 4 or 5. But I didn't grow up in a family of baseball lovers, so
No, there you go.
that could be the explanation. Now, as far as the painting goes, when did you start developing your talent for that?
Well, I mean, I started drawing kind of. I want to say it was around the same time. Uh, but I wasn't necessarily doing baseball stuff to start. So I grew up in the 1980s, born in 1980, and the first kind of thing that I remember gravitating towards when I was drawing uh, were the cartoons that I was watching. So, GI Joe, He Man, She-Ra, Transformers, stuff like that. My parents would actually tape episodes, from the television, and I'd kind of sit down in front of the TV, play the tapes, and I'd kind of pause it at my favorite spot or whatever, and I would just kind of sit there with paper and pencil and just draw. Um, so yeah, that the drawing started really early, and it was kind of soon after that I got into baseball.
Now, you can see in the background there's a picture of Mickey Mantle over your right shoulder. There is another picture of, I can't really tell because your shoulder is covering the face of the batter, but you are painting events and players and other people associated with baseball from an era way before you were born. So how did you get
Yes.
interested in that particular aspect of? I mean, you could be painting modern players, you could be doing other things, but you seem to be very involved in the historical.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was basically in the 80s, my connection to baseball, my connection to the Yankees kind of started with my father's baseball cards. He grew up in the city in the late 40s and early 50s when he was collecting baseball cards then. So he was one of the kids that has like the tragic story of his mom throwing out the majority of his collection, but he was still able to keep a few. So I was kind of first introduced to these cards that he had, these early, Tops and Bowman issues, uh, which were just they weren't photographs. They weren't. There was no photography on the cards. They were actually illustrated, and I think something kind of clicked in my head when I saw that because I could do that. I was drawing at the time, so maybe I could draw some of these players. My dad was a big Mickey Mantle fan, so why don't I draw a picture of Mantle and kind of get the proverbial pat on the head, and that's kind of how it started. But I think for whatever reason, maybe when I discovered those cards and my dad would kind of tell me stories about seeing those players, the Mickey Mantles and the Yogi Berras and Roger Maris's, people like that. For whatever reason, the stories kind of they kind of that gave that era a lot of color to me. And they seemed really interesting, especially because, the Yankees at the time were doing quite well in the 1950s. And in the 80s, granted, they had a good team and they did pretty well, but they didn't make the playoffs after 81. So I guess I just kind of identified with the past stuff more so than the current stuff.
Well, what do you call, I'm one of these people, I don't know anything about art, but I know what I like. What do you call your style? Is that photorealism?
It's tough to say. I mean, I think photorealism probably would do the trick in describing it. There are other kind of isms that are kind of mixed in, whether it's kind of impressionism or tonalism, things like that. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I think it's probably more kind of photorealism than anything else.
The reason I ask that is because photos from those days were basically black and white.
Yeah.
And you have to do an amazing amount of research to get the colors right. How do you go about doing that?
Well, that's the tough part. Well, it's the tough but also really fun part for me. Uh, as you mentioned, there isn't a ton of color photography from that era at all. There are some home movies that are in color that I was basically given access to. It was mainly from this series that was on HBO in the early 1990s called When It Was a Game, and that's just kind of a compilation of home movies that are shot by the ball players, the majority of which are in color. And it kind of dates back to literally 1938, which is kind of when uh, color film was kind of first available to the public. And there's just kind of there's so much historical information in that series and in those home movies that I was kind of able to work off of. So once I was able to kind of, I guess, discern what each movie was showing me, and I was kind of being like, okay, well, that's the World Series in 1949. That's what Yankee Stadium looked like in color there, and then here it is in 52, and here's Ebbets Field in 52. So I kind of started to develop a bit of a database, mentally and physically on the computer, or digitally, I guess, on the computer. And through other searches, whether it's kind of through eBay or other auction sites where I'm kind of like scouring like the internet for just color photos of that stuff. That's part of it. Also reading newspaper accounts, and sometimes a journalist might mention something like in a throwaway comment, saying like, oh, Ted Williams hit this ball and it hit off the red botany ties sign in left center or whatever. And something like that, which again is just a throwaway comment, is gold to me, because that's like a primary source of saying, okay, that's the color of that particular advertisement. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it just comes from exhausting research.
One of the reasons I decided to reach out to you at this point is you have, or maybe I just haven't noticed it before, but you pop up every day on my social media. You're
Oh,
posting a picture that you're in progress, a picture that you've done already. Is that a marketing thing? I mean, why have you just, to me, maybe again, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems you've embraced the social media in a way that you hadn't before.
well, I mean, I've been doing that. I've been doing that for a while, for years now. Just, I guess, being being aware of social media and the power of social media, and also obviously the trappings of social media, I think is kind of a boon for any artist. For me specifically, I think it's very beneficial because I can post, let's say, if I'm painting a landscape, something completely unrelated to baseball, I can post something on social and be like, okay, here's this painting I'm working on, or here's the finished shot of this painting. It's a landscape and yada yada yada, and that's it. And then it's kind of like I don't have I don't necessarily have a lot of other content to show. Uh, but with baseball, you have birthdays, you have anniversaries, you have all this stuff that kind of gives you an excuse, or gives me an excuse to just kind of post and put my work out there. Part of it is, it's definitely a marketing thing to an extent, but it's also it's kind of like I'm trying to kind of give, like, this probably sounds a bit corny and cliche, so I apologize, but it's like I'm trying to take the whole history of the game, that whole tapestry, and just kind of putting it out there as like a new way of looking at it, if that makes any sense.
The body of your work, I mean, again, I'm looking at Mantle, and that's a single person uh, illustration painting, and the one underneath that seems, well, it doesn't seem, obviously it takes a lot more work. How long does it take you to, like the mantelpiece? How long did it take you to do that?
Well, so like the mantelpiece is that's just like a small 9 by 12 portrait, and it's still got a ways to go, but uh something like that I can usually start and finish. If I'm not jumping around from piece to piece, I can usually finish something like that within a couple of weeks, maybe a little bit over a month. The other ones, like this one that you were talking about before, um it's a lot more complicated, where, what, let me show it to you. Let's see if I can do this properly without breaking anything. um oh my god, this is one of the problems of being short and small. um
Now, who are we seeing here?
okay, so here we've got Earl Coombs just lacing a base hit into the field in Yankee Stadium. This is 1928 against the Philadelphia Athletics. And there's a lot going on, where you've got Earl, you've got the catcher, you've got the umpire, you've got the crowd in the back, you have the stadium architecture, and all of that stuff just kind of has to be dealt with. And with like that Mickey Mantle image, that Mickey Mantle painting, I'm not worrying about that so much. So there's a little bit less to there's a little bit less to research. There's a little less, actually, it's probably a lot less elbow grease that goes into it, because obviously the Earl Coombs painting is a lot larger. But something like that, that takes a couple of months to finish.
How do you pick your topics for your players?
Well, I'm in a situation where I'm incredibly lucky and blessed, in that I have a lot of people who like to commission stuff from me. And for the most part, it's kind of their decision. They pick the subject matter. Every now and then they'll kind of give me, someone might give me carte blanche, or they might give me kind of a general idea of what they want. If it's like a Boston Red Sox player from this era or something like that. But when it comes to me, when I'm just kind of painting something that is for me, or kind of just on spec or whatever, I usually gravitate towards the players that I don't get to paint that often. Uh, so a lot of my clients, a lot of them, they love Babe Ruth, they love Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, Jackie Robinson, the legends of the game. And for me, I love those guys, absolutely adore painting them, and would do so very happily, until the day I die. But I also like some of the lesser known players, even if they're kind of like lower tier Hall of Famers. I enjoy painting them. But even the people who just played maybe a year or two, or a game or whatever. If you have an interesting story, or if you have kind of an interesting face, or if the photograph that I find or whatever has something interesting about it, whether it's a composition or a quality of light, then I'll usually just want to paint it. And I try to be diverse in that. I try to do, I guess, a lot of different teams, to just not be, Yankee specific, because that's, I think, probably what I mostly do. But I also try to do a lot of, Negro League paintings, and, like Latin American League paintings, and some of the women baseball players from the All American Girls Professional Baseball League. I mean, anything that is baseball related, I feel like I'm interested in painting and kind of putting out there.
You mentioned the Negro Leagues. You had a big project for them some time back. There was a set of cards, and that now I could kick myself that I didn't order them at the time of leaguers, Negro Leaguers. Uh, there's a picture over your left shoulder. Am I wrong? Is that the Babe Ruth appearing at
Yes.
Yankees?
Good eye.
I
Very
reckon
good
it's
eye.
the coat.
What I'll do that. That's easier than me picking that one up. um
This is his
that's
last appearance at Yankee Stadium.
right. His last one, I think he passed away maybe 2 months later.
Wow.
And it's, that famous Nat Fine photo. And this one's been sitting here for, not specifically here, but it's been sitting in the studio for a long time, and desperately needs to be finished, because I have a very patient client, and quite frankly, he's waited long enough. So I need to
I'm
kind of.
curious, your clients are when they buy these things, are these for their residences or their offices, or do you have any idea where they actually wind up?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, some of these people kind of are, like card and memorabilia collectors, and a lot of times they might commission a painting to kind of complement uh, their collection in some way, whether it's kind of a focus on a specific player or a team or whatever. And they'll kind of put them in their house somewhere, not even necessarily a quote unquote man cave, but somewhere in their house. There's some clients who have them in their office. There are some clients who have their paintings currently in storage for whatever reason. So it kind of varies.
When you well, here is I don't know if it would be a rude question or however. Uh, what would you charge for a picture like that Babe Ruth one?
This one.
Yeah.
Uh, so basically, what I do is I have I have set prices for smaller works. So like a 9 by 12, an 11 by 14, 12 by 16, those are kind of like these set prices. And then once you get to the 16 by 20 size, um, it's a price of $30 a square inch.
Interesting.
So that Babe Ruth painting, let me just do some quick math. That Babe Ruth painting is 40 by 50. So the price of that today would be 60 grand. The person who commissioned it, he did so at a much lower price because it was a long time ago. Uh, but yeah, so something like that size would be $60,000.
I'm ignorant of the art industry. Is that I've never even thought of it in terms of charging by the inch. I would have thought it would be a finished product would cost you X amount of money, but it's very interesting. The product by the inch. So can people say I want like 12 inches of Babe Ruth?
Yeah, I mean it comes down to that, where they'll say, here's this image. Um, I was thinking of this size or whatever, and I might say, oh well, I think at this size it's going to be a little bit too small, and Babe might be a bit compressed. So, why don't we go a little bit larger? If their budget allows it. But it's I think in the art world, at least in the quote unquote fine art world, uh, I think that's kind of a common thing. In the memorabilia world, it's a bit different, and it's kind of like they kind of go by a formula that I don't really like, where it's like if you have two baseball cards, you have a Mickey Mantle baseball card and like a Hank Bauer baseball card. The Mickey Mantle is going to cost more. The Hank Bauer is not as much. Mickey Mantle's a beloved figure. Hank Bauer, not as much, even though I love Hank Bauer. But for me, it's kind of like if you do a 16 by 20 Mickey Mantle and a 16 by 20 of Hank Bauer, they're going to be the same price. So in a way, yes, you're still buying the painting because of the subject matter, but the investment in it is a bit more so about, I guess, me and the actual art and the craft that goes into it, less so than, say, the player, if that makes sense.
Over the years, how many of paintings of all sizes do you think you've done?
Ooh, that's tough. Okay, am I if I'm including the color studies that I've done over the years, which are kind of just like little like 5x7 preparatory works, I want to say that it's definitely over 500. It might be closer to 750, maybe somewhere in that general ballpark. Yeah, it's tough to say because I've been doing this regularly for over 15 years now. And some years are, I guess, slower than others. Not necessarily in terms of output. Well, I guess there's less output, like the year my kids were born or whatever. But uh, you know, there's always output happening. It's just some paintings, maybe this particular year I'm painting larger ones, so I can only get 6 done a year or whatever. And then there's the project I did with all the Negro and Latin American leaguers, where those were all 5x7 color studies, and I did uh, it was almost 250 of those within a couple of years. So it's it all just kind of depends on, I guess, the size of the piece. I mean, otherwise, there's always something to, excuse the pun, draw from. There's always kind of inspiration. I'm never I've never found myself wanting for subject matter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, many years ago, most of the people I chat with, I've never met in person. We actually met at the Yogi Berra Museum a number of years ago, where you were presenting a picture of Lou Gehrig. Uh, do you make a lot of appearances like that?
Um, you mean in kind of like a formal presentation kind of thing?
Or I mean, have you ever had a gallery situation where you were there for a bunch of your paintings, or I guess, like, yeah, authors have author presentations or book signings or whatever.
Right.
Similar situations.
Well, I mean, I don't have many of them. So I was there at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City when that whole kind of exhibit opened up. I was there for that. That's about as grand as it's gotten for me, because I had an agent who owned a gallery in Bronxville, New York, and he never really had a show for me. And it wasn't the I think the reason he never did it was because the majority of the work I was doing uh, was commission work. So it didn't really make any sense to kind of do all this commission work and, kind of keep it and just have it on the wall or whatever, and have a bunch of people over and then just say, oh, well, these are all commissioned, so you can't buy them. I haven't really built up enough inventory, I think, to warrant a show, even though I'd love to have one at some point. And, I have like these little dreams in my head about the kind of theme of that kind of show. But yeah, it's kind of rare that I'm kind of out, and in front of my work, kind of in a public setting. um the thing at the Yogi Berra Museum when we met, um that was probably the only one that I did that year. It's different. I mean, as like you were talking about, as an author, it's like you have a launch party, and you kind of go to different places, whether you're on panels or whatever, and you can talk about your book there. For me specifically, it's just a lot less of that. Though I wish I could do it more.
I think that was my roundabout way of of getting to the question of, were you impacted at all by the pandemic?
Oh, oh yeah, yeah. The pandemic was rough, man. Thankfully, thankfully, we didn't get sick for the majority of the pandemic. We were all pretty healthy, uh, but the kids were home. My at the time, my youngest was not in. He was in daycare, but the daycare had to shut down for the majority of a year, and my oldest was in kindergarten at the time, and that was at home. So he was doing remote learning, and my wife and I, more so my wife, were basically the teachers. And with the kids, with both of them home all day, every day, getting work done was really, really, really hard. Uh, I there was definitely a slowing of production, or slowdown of production at that point. Basically, I was limited to, I could work maybe for like an hour or two at some point during the day, just to kind of to give my mind a break, I guess, from just being around the kids. But other than that, it's kind of like when they went to bed at 8 o'clock or 8:30, that was my time. That was my time to work. So I'd kind of just put in as many hours as I could do.
Is there, I know, I'm not referring to your children, but like artists and authors, like their books and paintings are their children in a sense. So is there one, and you love all your children equally, but is there
Right.
one of your painting children that you like more than any other, that you're most proud
Well, yes.
of?
On that same note, it's kind of funny that it's like the artwork. Each painting is a child, and I love each child, but at the same time, I want each child to get out of here and go to where they're supposed to go. um, so there are a couple that I've done that have really meant a lot to me. I don't know if there's one that I've done that kind of towers over all of the others, but the painting that we had at the Barra Museum for those few months that time that I met you, that Lou Gehrig farewell painting, that was a very special painting for me. There's a painting right now that's in the studio that has given me a lot of agita, and it's been really hard to complete, but now it's kind of almost complete. Like it's a very special one to me because of that and because of the subject matter. And there are certain other paintings that I feel like I just that I've captured something special. It's not even necessarily something tangible, but yeah, it's like some of them have special qualities that others don't have. Uh, that and that's not to say that those other ones are not successful, because it's like I'm giving 100% to every painting that I'm doing. Um, but yeah, I think there are certain paintings that do kind of tug on the heartstrings more than others.
As we wind down, I want to ask: is if people want to find out more about your work, is there a website they can go to or an Instagram?
Yes, if you want to see more of my stuff, you can go to my website, which is just graigkreindler.com. You just have to spell my name kind of right, and you'll probably be able to find me. Graig, just like Greg Nettles, and last name is Kreindler. I'm on basically most social media platforms. I'm even on TikTok, though I don't do anything on there, because for the first time in my life, I feel like that technology or that yearning to do that specific thing is kind of like passed me by. So now I'm feeling a bit older. Um, but yeah, as long as you can spell my name somewhat right, you can find me pretty much anywhere.
Well, I'm glad I found you after all this time. Greg, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you, Ron. I always love talking with you.